During the winter of 2003, I volunteered as a farmer assistant in a town outside of Nebraska. The farm would be everything you'd expect: rustic, serene, and abuzz with wild animals. I had always wanted to work with animals and was so thrilled at the prospect of gaining first-hand experience. The farmer whom I assisted was a very sweet old man named Ted, and he was in his late 70s and slowing down with his age. His wife had passed away, and his children all left home, so he was needing somebody to help around the farm with manual tasks here and there. I was young at the time, only 18, and it was the perfect work experience for me. Plus, I was able to score $100 a week, an amount at the time that sounded amazing. There, with stables on the farm as well, 5 beautiful horses, 2 males and a female. Every day, I would enjoy grooming the horses, combing their hair, and occasionally taking them out for a ride. I remember thinking it was the best summer ever, and the horses were the closest things I ever had to real friends. Before I dealt with the chickens or the pigs, I would routinely go to the stables every morning. The reason for my writing is that this ritual would result in a horrendous experience that has haunted me for many years since. I awoke at 6:30 a.m. every morning, putting on my rag of clothes and wellies. I would trudge over to the stables, enjoying the songs of birds and the sounds from various animals as they awoke for another day. However, on this particular day, I remember my Wellington boots crunching on the hay as I brought a bucket of water into the stables. I noticed little red marks in the hay as I traced my usual route into the stables. To be honest, I never even thought twice of it. Ted would occasionally have slaughtered chickens and turkeys, and so occasionally there would be traces of blood or organ meat scattered throughout the farm. I had learned to develop a strong stomach working on the farm. In fact, you have to have one to work with farm animals. The blood began a little more frequent as I neared the stables, and I felt like I had been kicked in the stomach when I noticed a pool of it at the door. Granted, these horses had become my friends. I talked to them about everything, and I felt such a deep connection to each one. As I neared the stables, I slowed down and stopped altogether. I knew what was behind that door. Death. The stench of it was so thick in the air that you could cut it with a knife. I could also hear the flies, which were no doubt feasting on whatever death was behind the door. What happened, I thought. I decided to tread closer, nearly tiptoeing, hoping that there was some life at least left behind. I drew closer to the door, and immediately I heaved. I was sick instantly at the sight of what lay behind the door. All 5 horses were lying dead, bloodied, ripped open, with maggots feasting on their exposed flesh. Something in the middle of the night came and tore these horses to pieces. I screamed for help, knowing that it was already too late, but wanting this sight to not be true, to wake up and find that all was well. I reached down and held Matilda's head. She was my favorite, shy, sweet, and affectionate. Now I cradled her severed head as I sobbed. Her glassy eyes were wide and open and glued to the ceiling, an expression of horror over her beautiful face. I'll never forget it. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. What had happened? As I sobbed there for the next hour, I eventually found the strength to alert Ted. He too was horrified, but reminded me that there was a CCTV on the site, and it would show whatever person or monster had entered the stables to butcher our horses over the night. We sat there in his office, with his stacks of paper scattered messily over everywhere, and bits of food and jam stuck on his desk. He switched on the CCTV with surprising ease, considering he was in his 70s, and we fast-forwarded the VHS tape, looking for anything unusual. That's when we finally spotted it, at 3:08 in the morning, A large beast-like man, of around 10 feet in height, could be seen walking and groveling its way into the stables. We couldn't make out its face, but it stood upright, just like a person, and almost appeared to be like a wolf. Dark matted black fur coating its entire body. This thing was a living beast, and kept alternating between walking upright on 2 legs and on 4 legs. We only saw it for about 4 seconds before it burst through the stables. Thankfully, there was no audio, as I think the sounds of the horses screaming would have been enough to send me stir-crazy. Myself and Ted were terrified. What was this beast that had broken into the stables at night for such a vicious purpose? Was this thing demonic? It was some kind of humanoid werewolf beast, a hybrid of a wolf and man, but clearly by all intent and purposes, marked by animalistic instincts beyond any reasonable bloodthirstiness. Ted looked solemn and so old as he observed the screen. I was only beginning to notice how wrinkled his face was. He didn't even know what to do. Close the farm? Call the police? The first thing he said was that I needed to go home, and now. He told me that he was a man of the land and would go take care of it, but that the farm was no place for a young girl like me. I just remember protesting and protesting, but eventually I gave in. I ended up getting a letter from Ted 6 months later on to say that he had been admitted to a nursing home after a very bad fall and that the farm was now up for sale. I was in college now, but it felt like a sense of ease that he was somewhere safe. All these years later, and I have no idea what still creature this was that came and killed the horses. Well, it turns out the police did end up getting involved, and of course they confiscated his VHS tape, so we essentially have no proof that this thing ever existed. They said it was going to undergo a thorough investigation, but you know how those things go. As I was scrolling through YouTube, however, I came across your Dogman videos, and am wondering if it may have been this creature. Normally, I don't believe in monsters, but I saw what I did with my own eyes. When I was a kid, around the age of 6, I used to go driving with my granddad in the countryside. On one weekend, after my granddad had a minor stroke, the doctor prescribed him to spend the weekend by the sea. This was the early 80s when such obscure medical advice was actually prescribed. I was Grandpa's favorite grandson, by far, and he took me with him to a seaside resort in the south side of Ireland. I was 6. Granddad would have been around his mid-60s at the time. We got on like 2 friends, though, and I remember having fun playing card games and board games with him at the hotel. We ate like kings and enjoyed going to a lighthouse by the sea and using the telescope to spot any birds or dolphins. This was before any kind of child safety measures, and Granddad would leave me in the hotel as he met another few men for a cigarette and a round of golf. I would just enjoy wandering around the hotel, talking to the maids, and generally being a good kid. Such freedom was wonderful for a kid. It's too bad kids today don't have that experience. But maybe in hindsight, it was too much freedom. As I encountered something deadly and terrible on these short excursions of freedom around the hotel of the surrounding seaside resort. On one particular occasion, I decided to go down to the sea and fly my kite. I remember it was a beautiful yellow kite that my granddad had bought for me in Corktown, and I loved running on the sea and watching the kite dance in the sky. And it seemed so far away, and I felt immensely grown up as I held it. I also loved how the other kids would watch me with envious eyes. It was most definitely eye-catching on the sea. I even had a yellow rain jacket to wear with it. I can never forget it. The wind was so powerful on this particular day. I can tell you it was November, and so it was not summer weather by any means. I remember vividly as it was Sunday, and the beach was dotted with few families out for a dip in the sea. Mostly surfers in wetsuits, as the weather was by no means ideal. I kicked my shoes off and ran around barefoot in the waves, feeling the cold, icy Irish water nip at my feet. As I looked down at my hand, I realized I had let go of my kite. I was so disappointed, and tears began to well up in my eyes. I searched around for the kite, and was relieved to see that it hadn't blown away very far. It was webbed on a few rocks, only about 100 yards away from me. I walked over and had to climb over quite a few jagged rocks to access it. I was now out of sight of the main beach, and in a little cave-like area, or a cove I should say, where the waves were coming in ever so slightly. This is where things turned south really quick. It was obviously very dangerous for a kid looking back, but being that young, I didn't care. I was intent on getting my kite back. As I reached out to get it, my small hands trying to reach down, I felt a gust of warm air behind me. It felt like the strangest sensation. I turned around and saw the most frightening thing I'd ever seen standing there, watching me. It was a large dog-like creature, around 8 to 9 feet tall. Well, maybe not exactly 8 to 9 feet, but it towered over me, and would have easily towered over my granddad. Its red eyes pulsating, with a face of anger. I can just remember its mouth agape, grinning, an evil, evil grin. It seemed to have a smooth black coat of fur all over its body, and its ears were long and had tufts of hair at the end. I remember I just about wet myself as I sat there on the rocks, not remember anything about my kite in the moment. The creature continued to grin at me, and I remember feeling utterly helpless and alone, that this was it. I mustered the strength to stand up and climb over the rocks, not turning back to see the beast. When I finally reached the other side, I ran back to the hotel, and surprisingly, this thing never followed me or gave chase. I didn't see it after that. I ran as fast as my little legs could take me. When I found my granddad later, he didn't believe me, but told me I must have had a bad nightmare during a nap. That was 40 years ago now, and I know what I saw. Judging by listening to some of your videos, I believe I encountered some kind of dogman. The only disturbing thing is that I only ever hear of encounters in the United States, judging from your stories. Very rarely do you ever hear about them in other parts of the world, like Europe, or in this case, Ireland. This experience has haunted me many years, and I still do have nightmares of this beast. I do not know if anybody else has encountered it out here, or maybe this creature perhaps is benign, and it meant no harm. Either way, to this day, I still do not go near the seaside, and do not let my own children out of sight. I am intensely clingy due to this experience and have many irrational fears. My hopes in writing this down is that you can help me and work through this problem that I have. The imagery of this beast is still very vivid in my head, just as it was then. I feel so lucky to be alive, because that could have been my very last moment. Had it devoured me whole, I would have been missing without a case, brushed under the carpet and forgotten about. Thank you for reading.